Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. This time, we're taking on the 1911 film L'Inferno, a true cinematic landmark.
That's right, one of the earliest attempts to bring Dante's epic vision to the screen.
And you've given me a treasure trove of material for this one. Excerpts from the Inferno itself, in Italian, no less.
Ah, yes, the original language adds a whole other layer of depth to the poetry.
We've also got scholarly commentaries to help us unpack it all.
Not to mention information about Dante himself, his life and times, and even some fascinating background on Longfellow's translation and Doré's illustrations.
So much to explore, and instead of just going chronologically, we'll be jumping around a bit, right?
Absolutely. We'll connect Dante's world with the poem's structure and then see how those elements were translated to the screen in 1911.
It's like piecing together a puzzle.
But instead of a flat image, we're getting a multi-dimensional view of L'Inferno, and that's exciting.
I'm already intrigued. And it's important to remember the historical context here, right?
Absolutely. Italy in the early 1900s was a time of great national pride and a kind of cultural revival. Dante, as a symbol of Italian literary genius, well, he was a natural choice for a groundbreaking project like this.
So, adapting Dante's masterpiece was like a way of showcasing both their heritage and the potential of this new art form, cinema.
Precisely. And L'Inferno, as one of the first feature-length Italian films, really helped put Italian cinema on the map.
But before we get lost in all the cinematic history, let's take a step back and get to know Dante himself.
Okay, so Dante Alighieri, born in 1265. Picture Florence, Italy, a city buzzing with political intrigue.
Got it, and Dante's right in the thick of it.
He was deeply involved in the political turmoil of Florence, you see. Italy at that time was divided into these city-states, and Florence, well, it was a battleground between two factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines.
Ah, those names. I remember them from history class, but remind me, who was who again?
The Guelphs supported the Pope, while the Ghibellines backed the Holy Roman Emperor. Imagine Italy like a giant game of Risk, with each city-state trying to outmaneuver the others.
Okay, high stakes. And Dante's caught in the middle of this.
Right in the thick of it. He started out as a Guelph, but was eventually exiled from Florence in 1302.
Exiled. That must have been devastating.
It was. It was a deeply personal experience of betrayal and injustice, and that sense of being cast out. Well, it permeates the entire Inferno.
So when Dante's writing about hell, he's not just talking about some abstract concept, right?
No, not at all. He's channeling his own very real experiences of loss, of political upheaval.
That makes you wonder how the 1911 filmmakers, working with silent film, how did they capture those feelings, that sense of isolation and despair?
We'll definitely keep that question in mind, but first let's take a closer look at how Dante structured the Inferno itself.
Structure is key, especially with a work this complex.
Imagine descending through 9 circles of hell, each one representing a different category of sin. And as you go deeper, the punishments become more severe.
Like a spiral staircase leading down to the abyss.
Precisely. Each level has its own unique torment, and Dante describes them in vivid detail.
And we actually have some of the original Italian here from Canto 1, the very beginning. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura.
Beautiful. Which translates to, midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark.
I get chills just hearing it.
That dark wood, it's a classic symbol of spiritual crisis, the very starting point of Dante's journey.
And it's not just a literal journey through hell, is it?
You're right, it's more than that. Dante's using these circles and punishments as allegories, as symbols to explore deeper truths about human nature.
So he's not just saying, don't be bad or you'll go to hell.
Exactly. He's exploring the nature of sin itself, how it can lead us astray.
That makes it a lot more relatable, even centuries later.
Right, like the she-wolf Dante encounters in the Darkwood, she represents avarice, greed.
Ah, greed, a timeless human flaw.
And then there's Cerberus, the 3-headed dog, guarding the circle of the gluttons. Dante's descriptions are so vivid, so visceral.
And that must have been a huge challenge for the filmmakers, bringing those images to life.
Especially in 1911. I mean, they didn't have CGI or anything close to it.
It was basically the dawn of cinema. I can't even imagine how they pulled it off.
Well, they were pioneers, and they had a few tricks up their sleeve. They created elaborate sets to depict the different circles of hell.
Drawing inspiration from Dante's descriptions.
Absolutely, and they even had access to Gustave Doré's illustrations, which were wildly popular in the 19th century.
I've seen some of those. They're incredibly detailed, almost overwhelming.
Doré really brought his own interpretation to Dante's words, adding a whole other layer of visual drama.
So you've got Dante's words, then Doré's engravings. It makes you wonder how closely the filmmakers actually followed the poem.
That's a great question, and one we'll definitely explore as we delve deeper into the film itself.
I can't wait. We've got Dante's world, we've got the structure of the Inferno. Now let's see how those elements came together on the big screen back in 1911.
Lights, camera, Inferno. And one of the things that really struck me looking at stills from the film is the way they captured those tortures, those punishments.
Oh, yeah. Give me an example.
Well, there's this one still, it shows the second circle of hell,
Hmm.
where the lustful are constantly being swept around by these fierce winds.
Oh, right, right. Isn't that the circle where Dante meets Francesca da Rimini?
It is, and her story is just so tragic.
She and Paolo, they were caught in this forbidden love affair.
Exactly, adulterous affair. And they were killed for it by Francesca's husband, no less.
Heavy stuff. And Dante portrays it all so beautifully.
He does. He allows Francesca to tell her own story, which makes her fate even more heartbreaking.
You can practically feel that passion, that despair, just looking at this still.
The way the figures are intertwined, the expressions on their faces.
It's incredibly powerful.
And remember, this was a silent film.
Right. No dialogue, no soaring music to tell us how to feel.
They had to rely solely on gesture, on expression, on the overall atmosphere of the scene.
Amazing how they were able to convey so much without words. They really were pioneers of visual storytelling.
Absolutely. And they weren't afraid to embrace the darkness of Dante's vision.
Yeah, some of those punishments are pretty terrifying, like the ninth circle of hell, where the traitors are frozen in a lake of ice.
Ugh, I know, right? Dante describes them all contorted into these horrific positions, some upside down, some with their faces twisted backwards.
Talk about nightmare fuel. How did they even manage to depict that on screen back then?
I have no idea. It must have been quite the challenge. Maybe they used mannequins?
Or even real actors suspended in ice.
Could you imagine? I mean, the audience seeing that for the first time. Those frozen figures trapped for eternity, their faces twisted in agony.
It would have been horrifying.
But also fascinating, right?
Definitely. There's something about those dark images that just draws you in.
It's the power of Dante's vision. And the filmmakers, well, they weren't afraid to embrace that darkness.
It's interesting, though, because on the one hand, you have this film celebrating Italian heritage, celebrating this new art form, cinema. But on the other hand, they're not shying away from the horrors of hell.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
Like, they're entertaining the audience, but they're also issuing a warning, right?
Right, you got it. Don't stray from the path of righteousness, or this could be your fate.
A powerful message, for sure.
And one that might have resonated even more strongly in those days.
So entertainment and morality play all rolled into one.
That's Dante for you.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the key images, some of the punishments, but how did they actually structure the film? I mean, the Inferno is such a complex, multi-layered poem. How do you translate that into a coherent film narrative?
Well, it seems they didn't try to adapt it scene by scene. It was more like a series of episodes, each focusing on a specific canto or a group of cantos.
So they kind of curated the experience, picking out the most impactful moments.
Exactly. And those choices, those decisions about what to include and what to leave out, well, they ultimately shaped how the audience experienced Dante's work.
And without dialogue, they must have relied heavily on those intertitles, right?
Those cards with the text on them? Oh, absolutely. They would have used those to bridge the gaps between scenes, to provide context, maybe even to summarize sections of the poem.
It's like they were creating a visual and textual tapestry.
Exactly. Weaving together these different elements to create a new and unique experience of the Inferno.
Fascinating. Now, what about Dante's own journey? Did they portray that accurately? Did we see his descent into hell, his interactions with the various figures?
It seems they focused on those key encounters, like Dante's meeting with Charon, the ferryman who transports souls across the river Styx.
Oh, right, Sharon. Spooky dude.
And there are scenes depicting the punishments of the lustful, the gluttons, those really visceral, memorable images.
And did we get to see Virgil? He's such an important character in the poem, acting as Dante's guide through hell.
Oh, Virgil is essential. It's likely they tried to stay true to Dante's portrayal of him, the wise poet, the voice of reason amidst all the chaos.
So the film wasn't just about the spectacle of hell. It also explored those themes of guidance, of companionship in the face of darkness.
Exactly. And that adds a whole other layer of meaning to the experience.
It's incredible to think how much they were able to convey with such limited means. It really speaks to the power of their vision.
And it makes you wonder how they handled the ending. I mean, Dante does eventually escape from hell. Did the film show that ascent? Did they give us a glimmer of hope?
Ooh, good question. I guess we'll have to wait for the final act of our Inferno deep dive to find out. All right, back for the final act of our Inferno deep dive.
Hmm?
It's mind-blowing. This film is over a century old, and we're still talking about it today.
It's a testament to its power, I think, to its enduring legacy.
And it says something about Dante's Inferno itself, right? I mean, it just keeps inspiring artists, filmmakers, even today.
Absolutely. That vision of hell, those characters, those punishments, they've seeped into our collective consciousness.
As we've been talking about the film, the visuals, those special effects they were using back then, I keep picturing the audiences in 1911.
Oh, I know, right? Can you imagine sitting in that darkened theater, seeing those images flickering on the screen?
It must have been so strange, so new, so unlike anything they'd ever seen before.
Especially those depictions of hell, right? The fire, the torment, the sheer scale of it all.
It makes our modern horror movies look tame by comparison.
And yet there's this beauty to it, too, this artistry.
It's that strange mix of horror and beauty that makes Dante's work so compelling, I think.
I agree. And the filmmakers, they were walking a tightrope trying to capture both those elements.
Speaking of tightropes, they had to make some tough choices when they adapted this poem, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, how do you even begin to translate Dante's Inferno, this incredibly complex allegorical work, into the language of silent film?
It's like they were creating a whole new visual vocabulary.
They really were, and they couldn't rely on dialogue or a musical score to create mood or tell the story.
So they had to make every image count, every gesture, every expression.
Precisely, and they had to be so inventive, using lighting and shadow, those intertitles, and of course the actors' performances to convey the emotion, the drama.
It's like they were composing a symphony, but instead of musical notes, they were using images.
I love that analogy, and it really highlights the artistry involved in silent filmmaking.
It's amazing to think how much they were able to achieve with such limited means.
It's inspiring, really, and I think it challenges us, as viewers, as creators, to rethink the possibilities of storytelling.
To look beyond the surface and find new ways to connect with an audience, to evoke emotion, to make them think.
Exactly, and that's something that Dante's Inferno, even in the silent film adaptation from 1911, still does so powerfully.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, one final thought to leave our listeners with. Imagine you're a filmmaker today, with all the tools of modern cinema at your disposal. How would you adapt Dante's Inferno? What visual styles, what storytelling techniques would you use to capture its essence for a 21st century audience?
Now that's a question worth pondering, and it reminds us that the power of Dante's work, it transcends time, it transcends any one interpretation.
So until our next deep dive, keep exploring those infinite depths and let Dante's vision be your guide. Happy diving!